I love mining, especially Bitcoin mining. I mean, look, we got some Bitcoin miners right there. Bitcoin mining is tough, more difficult than ever, literally, mathematically, to mine a Bitcoin. And the amount of Bitcoins mined per day is going down in the not so distant future. Enter Braiins. It's a Bitcoin miner firmware solution to give you full customization of your miner, right? You can overclock it. You can deploy it in Immersion easily and effectively and tune the parameters for that environment. You can underclock it, or basically turn the power consumption down, whether you just want to or need to, or you're chasing better efficiency. There's a lot you can do here, even more than what I just rattled off. Today, I want to dig into Braiins, what it is, and how I'm trying it out with my miners that I just gave a permanent bath to. Yes, they have been dunked in an immersion tank. They are liquid cooled Bitcoin miners. It's been an experience. So, yo, my name is Vosk. You're on the VoskCoin YouTube channel. Let's dig into it. Enter Braiins, auto-tuning mining firmware, increase your hash rate, improve efficiency as much as 25%, mine on any pool, or get 0% pool fees, which drastically reduces your fee associated with using their firmware. This Braiins software is available on the S19s, the S17 series, the T17 series, and the S9 series. And you notice it says X19. That means it also supports the T19 Bitcoin miners. The notable difference here is up to 20% better J/TH or joules/terahash or watts per terahash, right? And what does that mean? It's basically how much electricity you're consuming for how much Bitcoin mining power or hashes per second you're producing. So the dev fee for the 19 series is 2.5%, and you pretty much knock that down to 0.5% when you mine on the Braiins mining pool. So it's a pretty interesting incentive. It's basically a why not if you're going to actually use their firmware. The fee is the same on almost all of the other hardware, except for it's a little bit cheaper on the S9 series. And they're kind of past their end of life as far as Bitcoin mining hardware and efficiency goes. There's a lot of things Braiins can do: bulk device installation, updates, tools, SSH unlocker, quick startup, immersion cooling ready, preheat options if you're in a cold environment. So there's all that stuff. And I referenced Braiins Pool. You may be familiar with Slush Pool. We mined back on Slush Pool when I was getting into Bitcoin mining back in 2017. They are the original Bitcoin mining pool, so that's pretty cool. They also deploy Stratum v2, which they developed. And there's some benefits to Stratum v2. It's supposed to be basically censorship resistance when it comes to Bitcoin mining. It's a bit more technical than that, and it does a few more things than that, but you do get that with Braiins and their OS, so that's cool. They have the Braiins toolbox. This is a way to monitor, deploy, and change many different miner configurations all at the same time. This has a full release on Linux, and the Windows and Mac releases are coming soon, but some of the software is floating around in their Telegram support group. That's the quick crash course overview. So this is Braiins Pool, where my Braiins miners are. I have 8 Bitmain antminer S19J Pros, 104 terahash Bitcoin miners. They are all dunked into the DCX deployment, immersion deployment that, well, we just deployed. A couple reasons I did this. One of the lifesavers were that I did not have fan spoofers, and the antminer S19 needs to know that the fans are there and they're working. Otherwise, it'll shut itself off to make sure that it basically doesn't fry itself. So, didn't have those. But what's really cool is if you deploy Braiins onto your miner, you can click the immersion mode and it basically spoofs the fans for you on the software side. I've got a faulty trip-light PDU, so one of my 8 miners is down right now. Not the biggest deal. I'll deal with that. So we can see these here. I had them running on stock configuration, added the 7th one, and changed some of the tuning parameters. So I'm going to click over to the workers here. You'll see all of my miners in question. You'll see a lot of different performance here. Why? Well, because I'm having some fun. So I've changed the parameters several hours ago. The tuner is still working. And let me explain. Oh, God, a light theme. So you click on system, you go to dark. To log into Braiins, right? So let me backtrack. I've already remoted into my mining farm, and then I'm remoting into my mining rigs. So I grabbed their IP address, punched it into the browser. Then it brings me to the miner interface. Looks like this. Default password is root. Default username is root as well. So if I come over here to the dashboard, you can see that this is just stock. So this is, again, a 104 terahash model. We're getting a real hash rate of 110, and our 24-hour hash rate is 105. So how? What's happening here, right? Well, we can see that it's bumping up our power usage right now. We're consuming an additional 250 watts reported over the stock 3068 watts. This puts us at about 30 watts per terahash. And to put this into perspective, right, what I consider the current generation of Bitcoin miners would be the S19 XP. And that mines at about 21.5 joules a terahash, or 21.5 watts per terahash. There are the basically efficiently tuned end of life cycle S19s that are basically like finely crafted S19s. They do 23 joules or watts a terahash, consuming 2,760 watts, mining at 120 terahash a second. Now keep in mind, there's the S21 series coming soon that will probably be mining at about 15 terahash per watt. And that's a great number for many reasons, but one, you compare it to this, those will literally be twice as efficient as these miners that I'm using. And that's kind of how you end up getting boxed out. So if you're watching this video, you probably like Bitcoin. And what if I was like, hey, you want some free Bitcoin? You'd probably be like, yeah, okay, buddy, sure. But that's really the deal. You can click the link down in the video description below, support the sponsor of this video, watch their webinar, and get 10 bucks for free paid out in Bitcoin. And maybe you'll like what they're talking about, trading bot and other ways to try to earn money with cryptocurrency. It's called the crypto code, by the way, and we even have a full video review up on the channel if you want my full breakdown on it. So we look at the Bitcoin mining difficulty, and we pretty much just live in a perpetual all-time high cycle. I mean, we're slightly under that, but you know, I'm sure within a month we'll hit a new all-time high. Month over month, it gets so much more difficult to mine Bitcoin. Even with the halving incoming, I don't think we're going to see a lot of relief on that front. There's just too much money invested. There's too many people that believe it's just too bullish. So with all that said, I'm thinking, how do I make this more viable? How do I make my operation more viable? Right now, I'm at 10 cents per kilowatt hour my electricity cost. Not great. Not great at all. So I am working on deploying 3-phase, which will bring my electricity rate down to 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. But I'll get there when I get there. In the meantime, I got to work with what I got. This is one of these miners. This is another one on the stock power limit parameters. I didn't adjust anything. This is just Braiins doing their thing. Now let's look at this. I put in 2,800 watts. Braiins bumped it up to 3,000, and it's bringing me back to that 30 watt, a terahash. Here's another miner of the same model that I put at 2,500 watts, and it bumped it up to about 28, 29 watts a terahash. Here's another miner limited to 2,000 watts. Braiins has bumped it up to 2,100, and I'm coming in at 26, 27 watts a terahash. 1,800 limit, same miner model here, 25.5 watts per terahash. 1616 bumped itself up all the way up to 1,800, and it's getting about 27 watts a terahash. There's a lot of ways to go about tuning these things. This is still tuning itself. It's still tuning the individual chips. So it is trying different parameters right now. This has not completed. So I'm gonna get some longer term data and splice it in right here. Wearing one of my funniest shirts, or one of my favorite new shirts, if you will. Let's look at Braiins. Let's do an update. Let's see where these numbers fall. So I'm already logged into a couple of these. And so I'll just kind of run through the list. Most of them are in relative order. So we see this one's at 2.2 or 2,200 watts power limit. And then Braiins is basically trying to find the best efficiency in there for me. So you can see we're getting about 25.5 watts a terahash, and it's mining around 90 terahash a second. 1,600 watts, this is where it starts to fall more in order. We're getting about 25 watts of terahash efficiency. I've been watching this a lot. I have seen these numbers trend towards 23 watts of terahash. They're running a little bit hotter than they normally do by about 4 degrees Celsius, or ideal conditions or whatever, if you will. This is 1,800 watt power limit usage, and it's running at about 25 watts a terahash and realizing a hash rate of about 75 terahash a second. Most important number here is actually going to be 24-hour hash rate. So if we come down here, we can see, on the 1600, we are at 66 for 24 hours. We're at about 88 24 hours on that one. And so now we're at 2,000 watts. And we're getting, again, around that 25 watts a terahash. I have noticed this one trends more towards like 23, 24 watts a terahash efficiency. 24-hour hash rate there is going to be at about 81 terahash. And Braiins default is root, so we log in 2,500 watts, bringing us to that 27 marker, and we're getting a hash rate at 24 hours about 94 terahash. And I know it's numbers, it's a little boring in a way, right? But there's a lot of good data. It's good to crunch. It's good to figure out what's going to be the best, for my operation. And you can compare it to yours. So my power limit's at 2,800 watts, but it's pulling about estimated about 200 watts above that, realizing about almost 100 terahash a second over 24 hours. Efficiency going into the 30s, and in this era, that's just high. That's just high. Stock power limit 67 degrees Celsius, and that's going to equate to about 31 degrees. And finally, we've got this one hashing away, full power here as well, getting about 30 watts a terahash, a realized hash rate over 24 hours of 107 terahash a second. So let's take a moment to appreciate that these are 104 terahash a second miners. At their stock hash rate, they're supposed to mine at about 104 terahash. Stock Bitmain firmware, you consistently see, 104, 105, maybe 106, but we're clocking in a little bit above that on this one, which is nice to see. And on this miner, we're clocking in a little bit below that. A key thing to understand when you're looking at hash rate as well as efficiency, especially on Braiins, the hotter these things run, the less they're going to mine and the less efficient they're going to be. So a lot of my data came back between, 23 watts a terahash, 24, 25. And Braiins is really consistently pushing these more towards like 25 watts a terahash, even when I drop the power figure down. And there is a variance here. They've all run their tuner. So the tuner ran for several days, several different, on all of these different configurations. There's even more you can do with the actual fine tuning of all of this, right? You can put a hash rate target, you can put a power target, you can do dynamic power scaling and decreasing your values and things like that. But for me, especially with my experience using this firmware, I just want to keep it nice and simple, on target. So to sum it up, looking at the fine tuning here, my initial impressions of it, and just, using this very simply, but again, effectively. So I run through all these different power ratios, and basically at this temperature, in this immersion deployment, with this configuration, it pretty much seems like on average, I'm ending up around 25 watts a terahash. So if my efficiency is relatively unchanged there, then I may as well pick the highest power usage setting that keeps me around that efficiency, which so far in my testing, 2,200 watts seems to be like a really good sweet spot where I'm still at 25 point something on average. But I'm getting closer to 90 terahash a second. I go all the way down to 1,616 watts, which you would think would be the lowest power usage and then maybe probably the most efficient. And it's just not performing very differently. So for now, I'm going to flip them all over to 2,200 watts. And I'm going to review the data and go from there. This will significantly help the temperatures because right now I have two miners just at full bore over here. I mean, they're consuming 3,250 watts and, they're supposed to do 3,068, again, stock firmware. 2.8 power limit coming in at about 3,000 watts consumed. Basically, I'm running 3 of the 8 miners in this tub at full bore. Actually, technically, basically overclocked. 2 of them, definitely. So as I click around in this data, you see the variance. You see the 24, the 25. Now this has trended up towards 26. As I chase a good balance of efficiency versus just straight hash rate. How do I even do what I'm doing though, right? So we have the dashboard dark theme. I like it. We're on the immersion mode, so our fans just show straight 100, but there are literally no fans even on the device. I see my system uptime. I see all this information. It's all good. It's nice. It's easy to digest. It's helpful. I get a quick readout of my chip temperature, right? We can look at the hash rate. We can look at the temps here. Dangerous listed at 90C, hot at 80C. Target is 60C. Speaking of immersion mode, to do that, you go to configuration. You click on temperature and fans, and then you click the checkbox next to enable immersion mode. All the fans are then disabled. Now let's go over to the configuration. You see my basic mining pool setup here. So if you want to put any mining pools in here, you put them in. And this is the information you use for the Braiins pool, which you can just grab off their site. Easy to bump these up and down or trash them. And you can also load pool groups here, which is a pretty cool feature. Enter performance. So with this, I have auto tuning on. I have power targets, and this is where I was adjusting all of those watt parameters. You can also instead do a hash rate target. One thing I have not enabled yet is dynamic performance scaling. Braiins has some good data out on efficiency, and let's take this snapshot of it. Really cool part too is they're using the same model. The S19J Pro is a very popular Bitcoin mining rig in many mining farm deployments, especially over the last couple of years. At 20 Celsius, 2,500 watts, which for us Americans like me, that's 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the power consumption, assuming the stock hash rate here, right? The power consumption goes all the way up to 3,550 watts in the 75 Celsius range, which is 167. So keep in mind, we're talking chip temperature. It's probably not 167 degrees Fahrenheit outside. I hope not. The same pattern is generally true for other frequencies. They also took this data at the wall and not relying on their firmware, which estimates the power consumption. If you change the frequency of the miner, which is basically the boards, which is basically the chips, which is basically overclocking or underclocking, if you're familiar with those terms, from 450 to 650 megahertz, their data shows that this trend is prevalent across the board. Braiins takes cooling so seriously. If you're using this on an air-cooled deployment, when they're tuning, they run the fans at 100% speed. It's interesting because, I was trying to save on my electricity by running less exhaust fans in my mining farm setup. But it seems as I dig deeper and deeper into more data and, just compiling my own data plus others, that the absolute electricity bill killer is inefficiency or heat-soaked gear. The hotter the stuff is, it will drastically start consuming more electricity, as it's just going to become less and less efficient. And it will have to work even harder to try to cool itself, all while being less efficient. Let's talk about this dynamic power scaling thing. Cutting edge feature, adjust your Bitcoin's mining power, minimize downtime, extend the lifespan. Okay, sure, sounds great. Why not, right? So looking at their data here, it's probably going to say this is good. Important feature, DPS, dynamic power scaling, preventing downtime, hardware failures that occur in hot summer months. How does it work? Set a hot temperature which you want the miner to reduce its power consumption and thus produce less heat. Set a power step. Default's 300 watts. I've read some posts that say 200 watts a good power step option if you're chasing efficiency. When the miner reaches the hot temperature, it reduces the power. This process repeats and repeats, reducing each time that it's in the hot temperature zone. They quickly note that you can also use this as a means of managing the total power consumption of your mining fleet. If increased temperatures lead to increased power consumption, then setting up DPS to occur at lower hot temperatures, like 70 or 80 Celsius instead of the typical 90, will prevent your total power consumption from going too high during the hottest parts of the day, because the machines will automatically run at lower settings during that time. Here's a chart they have that shows the power scaling down, scaling up, in line with that hot part of the day. One thing I'm working on right now is developing these tuning profiles. And this occurs on each miner, and it can be applied to other miners of the same model within your own fleet, to my knowledge. But you fire it up, it gets that base tune level, etc. Right? You can also put in these different watt targets. For example, if you're doing all intervals of 250, and they say that you can seamlessly switch between profiles in the hot summer months with a 250 watt power step. I think these are all cool things. They're useful things, and it really kind of makes you think, why don't we see more of this in just stock firmware? Why does Bitmain limit us so much? Probably just to make it idiot proof, right? Less warranty claims and things like that. They have released some low power modes that have more or less been a one-click option to fulfill the needs of many, but not every. But that's not available on every miner. So definitely keep that in mind. Whereas Braiins gives me the option to do whatever I want with any miner that they support. In reference to all these temperatures and targets and stuff like that, that is under configuration, temperature and fans. And here's the auto setup. We can adjust these if we want to. We can go to manual, or we can completely disable this. Another cool feature with Braiins is you can also enable or disable hashboards. Say you got a bum board, you don't have a replacement or feel like dealing with it or whatever, or any kind of issue, right? You click this, save and apply, bam, shut it down and move on. And I will tell you, if you haven't experienced a bad hashboard yet and you continue to mine year over year and get more and more miners, one day you will. So for me personally, when it came to using Braiins, right, I wanted to use Braiins for a while. I tinkered with it a little bit years ago. Honestly, I can barely remember. It's been a hectic couple of years. But my target here is to get this efficiency into the 25 range. So figuring out the settings and tuning profile to get there. I'd like to get to an even better spot, right? But I'm chasing that 25% efficiency boost. It'll take some tuning. Ideally, I'd like to still have the miners above 80 terahash a second, because I understand that, the more I tune this, I will have to sacrifice some of that hash rate. That's a decision I'm personally working towards, right? Because this is deployed in Immersion, and at this point, I'm gonna, run these I'm probably just gonna run them in that deployment forever, unless I get, a bunch of new gear, and I'm like, okay, you're definitely getting dunked. But since they're set up and covered in immersion fluid, they're basically really only suited for immersion mining moving forward. So if anything, I would just drop another immersion tank next to that one if I wanted to do that. So operating with how I just basically know that I am is I'm like, okay, tune these. Make them as efficient as possible while still maintaining a good mining power footprint. Braiins is going to be a great solution for me here. Got some good mining rewards on the Braiins pool so far. Gonna have to mess around with it, do some more research. I'm But yeah, this is fun. It kind of reminds me of the days of tuning graphics cards with GPU mining. I enjoy this. I think it's fun. It can be a little tedious, but once you finally nail that sweet spot, you're like, hell yeah, I got a finely tuned setup, baby. Overall, I've really been enjoying Braiins. And since Dennis and Colby at BMA helped me deploy directly to the control board when we did the immersion setup, I don't have an SD card. SD cards are okay. They fail sometimes, whereas the control board is less likely to fail than an SD card that you inserted into it. So control board deployments, I'm told, are just so much better if you can do it. I'm especially cautious given the fact that, again, this is an immersion fluid, which somewhere between motor oil and vegetable oil. It's kind of weird. But the bottom line is I don't want to be touching it. I don't want to be taking these things out. And I want to set this stuff up to not only be efficient, so it's viable from a BTC mining point of view, profitability, but also increase the lifespan of this gear. I hope this is earning well and just continues to run for quite a long time. And I really just cannot understate how astonished I am with how much cooler mining rigs run when immersion, right? So they have the dry cooler that's outside my shed and it's cooling the oil that they're in. And wow, like it's like putting off the heat of less than one miner, but there's 8 in there. But what I'm gonna do is cut a fan into that shed and just get some ambient air flowing through. Just make sure it's not stagnant and it just kind of becomes like an oven, especially as I add more immersion mining deployments in there. And hopefully that will increase my efficiency, help get the chip temps down in these miners even further. And then at the end of the day, I've got a very long-term viable Bitcoin mining operation here. That's the goal, that's the dream. And if things go crazy and hopefully things become super profitable for many different generations of miners, maybe I'll just crank these up, overclock them to high heavens, and get it while you can. But until then, I'm going to take the more conservative route, treat these miners with love, respect, and get my electricity bill down a little bit while still staying in the mining game. So this is my overview of Braiins. I know this is not including flashing to an SD card. When it comes to that, you just download the Balena Etcher app. If you've ever flashed a USB drive back in the GPU mining days, or if you've ever even just formatted an SD card, it's pretty much the same thing. It's very easy. Download the file, you click right here, done. And then you take the lid or the top off of the miner, and then you get access to the SD card slot, slide it in. Just make sure you look at it and understand if you've got a BeagleBone or a Xilinx, an AM Logic control board on there, so you're using the right version if that's relevant and applicable for you. But as always, life and everything else in it is really just a journey. It's not just A to B, it's everything in between. So with the Bitcoin mining farm build out, I've got my base map quite literally. And from here, I'm just gonna keep refining and working within my parameters. When I can drop my electricity rate, maybe I'll turn these up. Maybe in a bull run, I would also turn them up. But as it stands now, personally, I'm taking a efficiency standpoint. I'm gonna make these the most efficient I can and basically just let them run forever. These miners in this particular situation, I will run them forever. Done. And if they start developing problems, if they're still functional, I'll probably just let them run. And if they get to a point where they're just terribly useless, maybe I'll just turn them off. They become the dreaded e-waste. But I'm hoping I can pivot towards solar power to make it where efficiency is not the number one thing on my mind, because I'm starting to make my own power. But that's a dream right now, not a reality. So I work with what I got within those parameters, and that's all I got. So thanks for watching. If for no other reason than for the BB here at VoskCoin. That's the big brain. That's going to be Tails Vosk. We run 10 seconds of Tails on every video. Why? Oh, no. The question is, why not?